this idea of inevitable globalization not actually being as inevitable as you think it might be. You're still gonna have these really macro spaces of like, this is a region of the world and that's not the same as this other region of the world, right. And they may not necessarily like each other very much. Nationalism, broadly speaking, like we're obsessed with the fact that we're from Slovakia. Like, I see that probably long-term not
going.
Yeah. What I don't necessarily think is always going to happen is the idea of like a max globalism.
Right. That's a very difficult thing to maintain.
Yes. My gut feeling, I wonder if this is sort of a direction things would go is, and this would be, let's say, for the next several hundred, maybe hundreds of years, but because I'm thinking sort of, if you need to get humanity off the planet and you need to get them advancing and towards the stars, so to speak, right? Like, you can't do it with the resources of really any single country, I think, that exists currently. Like,
probably
the U.S. would have the best shot of anyone. Like, the U.S. has a lot of stuff in it.
Right, but part of the reason we have all this stuff is that we are very greedy with it. We don't like giving it anywhere.
Yes, and we have trade routes and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think you'd need. Like, again, I think the max globalism thing, I don't see that in
probably not.
Coming generations. I don't see that actually playing out, and I think the people who are pushing for that, I don't think it's going to end well for them.
I mean, we're so naturally tribalist, which I mean, it's unfortunate, but we really are. Even like regardless of countries, just people being like, I worked here first, so we're one of the people that work in this company, you're in that other one, and it's like we're very. Group-based, so I don't think it ever could go away.
No, I don't think so. I wonder, though, if there will be a sense of, like, macro-regional blocks. This idea of, like, an area that used to be, like, 12 different countries is now, like, this zone, essentially. Because but the country thing is so hard, I think, to predict with the way something would evolve in 10,000 years. Because it really does, like, you've got human tribalism that I don't think is going to go away.
And it can upend everything.
But I still don't see, and I think this is why a lot of the conflicts with, more global, kind of momentum that's now getting kind of a bit of a pushback in a lot of places is like, you can't just upend, in many cases hundreds, in some cases thousands of years of humans having done stuff and then been like, okay, so we're done with that.
It's over.
We're going to do this thing now.
Right.
And like, people don't naturally go
change.
Yeah, they're like, wait, no.
No. I think it's more reasonable to expect something more like the EU. Where there's a global community and we all kind of, or like the UN, right? Where it's like we're still a separate community, and they might not be the countries now. They might be, like you said, macro.
These
areas.
big kind of conglomerations.
But being like, okay, this is continents, right? North America, South America, Europe, but all under a global community that does have some kind of cohesiveness, rather than warring countries fighting over. The same thing we've been fighting over forever.
I also, I wonder too, and this is just, I get everyone's always changing their opinions, based on the direction of the wind of the year, but like, the fact that I don't think it's long term. I don't think the BRICS are going to work as a concept, but that idea of like, it's essentially a rival. Do you know the BRICS? So the BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Was a concept that was created by, I think it was a Goldman Sachs economist in like 2001, 2004, something like that. And it was basically him looking at the map and saying, these 4 countries, eventually 5, are the new hot spots of economic growth in like the next couple of generations. That is an idea of sort of this, the globe not being divided up by countries per se. Like, maybe the borders still exist, but it's almost like the way we think of like US states, where it's like, there's still local designations. Like, Canada will still be a country, the US will still be a country. But in terms of like working on a space project, or like what alliance team are we playing on? Like,
and the space station's a great example of that, because it's people from all over the world work in that space station.
But what I wonder is if, and again, this is not like a 10,000 years thing. This is maybe a like few hundred years out. Is you start to see like blocks emerge where it's like, this is this alliance block, and these countries are all friends with each other, and like they have a lot of inter-travel, they have a lot of inter-trade, they have a lot of like, they're sharing technology and cultures and stuff. Exactly. But then they really don't like rival block X, and rival block X, they have their own trade routes and their own freedom of movement and their own whatever, and they're like, we do not like the people in this country. And then there's going to be some
countries, kind of setting up for like a world war.
And they're setting up a world war, or a sort of, or a Cold War, whatever you want to call it. But that idea that, I mean, essentially what you would have is like, going back to the Cold War originally, like the West, shall we call it, with a couple of pickups, maybe random countries thrown in there, and
Italy,
then
maybe, whoever knows.
And then sort of like the China-Russia bloc, and that's like a bloc, and they've got their countries, and those countries are, and then you've got like India. I mean, they did this kind of a little bit in the 50s, 60s already, where it's just like thinking of India and like, are they going to have their own little block? And you could see like, if stuff gets more divided into these zones, and especially with even things like AI and technology, is the technology used as a bridge, or is it used as a wall?
Is it
used as a firewall?
And it's highly starts because recently it's been feeling more like the walls.
It's been feeling more like the walls are coming up.
But part of that might be being in America, where we are definitely getting this sort of polarization that might not be as. I mean, I haven't gotten to travel all lately, so it might not be as prominent in other places.
I think we're talking daily life here. The political polarization in the U.S. is a real thing, but in terms of information, like that's still, you can do whatever you want. I'm talking about the idea of like, in Russia and China, there are legitimate informational firewalls that are now like in place, and so essentially what's happened is you could see that third dimension of like, how are humans going to develop over centuries. You think, 21st century, modern day, we've got all this stuff, like, it's just a matter of time, and then we're going to become one big global community. Yeah. It's like, well, what if technology can actually be used to build walls in the flow of information, and so now you're actually back to this phase of regional identities and like rival,
but in the digital space,
which then manifests onto the physical space. And so like,
I think we're going to end up getting both, really, because we kind of tend to do both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that raises, and so then I wonder if like, the concept of geopolitics and conflict with countries, like that will continue. And there will still be this idea of like the us and them, and like this identity here and this group here, but it's just, there's now this third dimension of space in which
the communication or meeting happens.
Yes, meeting happens or not if borders are drawn. It's the only thought that I have though about how, and some sort of economists and strategists are talking about this, like this idea of inevitable globalization not actually being as inevitable as you think it might be.
Right.
That, again, I do think really like tiny little, like that stuff I think is going to go away, but you're still going to have these really macro spaces of like, this is a region of the world, and that's not the same as this other region of the world, and they may not necessarily like each other very much.
And it might even be more volatile at that point, because now you have thinking like sleeper agents, kind of thing. You have a digital access. You have people across the world who are in their own little community, who physically live in one of these other areas, and as much as we like being able to talk in the digital space, as soon as bombs start going, that's physical. It's very, aside from the digital warfare, it becomes a very physical thing. Yeah.
So it raises the question for me about, in terms of the future of humanity and like space programs, let's say. We're just doing future of humanity in general, I guess. So we could talk about politics too, but like, is that I could see that manifesting, almost in like a second space race kind of way, where you have these different blocks, and they've got like rival space programs, right? Where the idea is like, the Chinese, the Russo-Chinese sort of parts of Asia faction, parts of the Middle East will be, like Pakistan and stuff. They're like, we've got our space program, and we're pooling all of our resources to get as much stuff as we can up into space. So that's something I wonder about, the idea of a second space.